the second section of the orality of language begins with, or let us say that the title of the second half of the essay is Did You Say Oral Literature? And this section basically per se deals with the problems in the term oral literature. The writer believes that the term is contradictory and it is a very imperfect way of describing oral art because of many things. And this forms the subject of the second part. Why the term oral literature is contradictory and is a deficient term. Not only deficient, the writer uh, almost goes to the extent of saying that oral literature is a misnomer. It's primarily a flawed term. It's wrong to use oral literature for oral art. And in the course of the essay, he uses such words as preposterous and a monstrous concept for the term oral literature. Now, what is basically his argument in the second half of the essay, the orality of uh, language? Basic point that he makes is related to the connotations of the term literature. Now, literature is a modern day invention, or we can say that it is a term which has its origin in the Latin term litera, which means alphabet, letter. So, primarily, literature as a term refers to written material. In this sense, we can say that the term oral literature is contradictory, paradoxical, because on one, the first half of the term refers to orality, sound, voice. Second part of the term refers to writing, alphabet, written material. So, as I have said, the writer believes that it is an imperfect way of dealing with, or rather, he is of the opinion that the literate world has not been able to come to terms with orality because of a very myopic view uh, linked with the preemptive power of literacy. Now, this is a term which is reiterated again and again in the course of the second section. The preemptive power of literacy alludes to the very the sway of you know, written systems of language which are integral to modern experience, which are integral to modern learning. They have such a strong influence on our consciousness and on our minds that we cannot look beyond them and conceive of language in terms of sounds. Whereas the truth is that, as has been brought out in the first part of this essay, sound is basic, it's primary. The origin of language lies in sound, and sound is so vital to the existence of language that even after the creation of written texts, sound keeps on residing in the text. So owing to this, the writer makes a case for rethinking orality, for thinking of orality not in terms of literacy. Now, this is his basic problem, that uh, orality has been conceived as a variant of literacy, as a substitute of literacy, as something. Later on he will use the term, you know he will try to explain his point by saying that it is something like, thinking of horses or defining horses as engineless automobiles. Now this is primarily wrong. How can you, describe horses, which are which is a kind of an animal species, and link in terms of engines? So this is the contradiction. This is the paradox. So he, coming back to the essay, he says that there has been a tendency, because of the preemptive power of literacy, to think of orality in terms of literacy as a variant of literacy, as a substitute of literacy, whereas the case is the opposite, because literacy was developed later, quite late in the history of human life, and orality continued to be the normative model of the use of language for what he says tens of thousands of years. So it is tantamount to saying that human beings, that modern day human beings, are not only ignorant of the nature of orality, rather they are incapable of grasping the concept of orality because of the dominance of textuality, literacy, written systems in the modern day language. So this is a major flaw in the thinking, or in the understanding of, or in the perception of the of modern people like us. So uh, to, sum up this point, he finds a problem with the term oral literature, because in this term oral art is subsumed under literacy, or is understood, seen in terms of writing, which is a wrong thing to do. Later on, in the very beginning of this section, he says that oral art actually developed independently, without any uh, without any, you know aid, or without any reference to writing. So it is wrong to, basically wrong to treat these two independent categories as if they are, you know, they are, they have a commensal relationship with each other. They have to be correlated all the time. It may not be entirely right to correlate orality and literacy all the time, and to see one in terms of the other. So the next section has a very, very interesting point. The point is that when we say that it is not entirely correct to correlate orality and literacy, uh, it is based on a categorical difference between literacy and orality. What is that difference? Let me quote. Writing makes words appear similar to things. Now, this is the difference, whereas orality does not do any such thing. When we write down words, in written scripts, what do? We lend or we impart a concreteness to language. We make, we do not only convert sounds into letters, but we can say that we go beyond that and we make language resemble objects. So it is a kind of a objectification, and words or language gets objectified when we write it, and the potential of circulation increases. This is precisely what happens because, as was stated in the first part, when written systems of communication are developed, or when grapholects replace dialects, what happens is the potential of communication increases, and written systems can be used by larger and larger number of people to, you know, connect with each other. So their language becomes a, we can say, a cultural force which can act as a homogenizing agent. So it has great impact on the cultural life of human beings. This cannot be said about orality, because he says that whereas letters, alphabets, when we convert language into writing, remain there as the residue, which uh, is the, which remains in the form of a property to be used anywhere in in an endless and timeless manner. The same is not the case with orality, because orality is intrinsically different from literacy. In orality, uh, the if a story that has been told by one person uh, is to be re-narrated, it is not present in the form of a property object in a concrete written form. It is there in the form of potential. This is the term he uses. Let me quote. Oral tradition has no such residue or deposit. When an often told story is not actually being told, all that exists of it is the potential in certain human beings to tell it. So, here, this is a very important clue to the conceptualization of oral art and written art. How oral art and written art are categorically and conceptually different, because when art uh, is produced in written forms, okay, it is it is available in the concrete form of manuscripts, books, okay, and other such forms. And but when you conceive, when you conceptualize oral art, there we have to think in terms of the potential of a text to be told, retold orally. Okay? So here, let me draw your attention once again to the concept of primary, because our concern or the concern of Ong here is primary orality and not secondary orality. In this section also, he distinguishes between the two by once again reminding us that primary orality is the orality of cultures which were untouched by writing, which which had no familiarity with or acquaintance with any systems of writing. On the other hand, secondary orality is the orality of those communities which know both how to read and how to write. So the term oral literature, when it is used for explaining and describing primary orality, is, according to Ong, a misnomer, a monstrous concept, and a preposterous term. I quote, "This strictly preposterous term remains in circulation today, even among scholars now more and more acutely aware how embarrassingly it reveals our inability to represent to our own minds a heritage of verbally organized materials except as some variant of writing. So this statement includes everything I have been saying. The preemptive power of literacy, the inability of human beings to grasp the concept of primary orality, two, and third, to understand primary orality purely in terms of literacy as a variant of writing, as as I said in my earlier lecture, as a less evolved or underdeveloped form of writing. So, but this, as we all know, is wrong because, as we have just mentioned, orality developed independently for ages and ages before writing was ever known. Second, now next point is that the power of literacy, the preemptive power of literacy, has led to another problem. The problem is again linked with the use of the term oral literature for primary orality. Now, here he says that the specificities related with the term literature, that it refers to written material, is ignored and it's forgotten. You One has to uh, care about the connotations related with literature. And the most important connotation related with literature is that it refers to writing. This is the specific meaning of literature. But what happens is that the term literature is irresponsibly extended to cover everything which is, which is produced in the form of art, to cover even that art which was never written. So how can you use the term literature for art which was never produced when the term literature basically refers to written material? So this is his problem, which he very creatively then kind of exemplifies by saying that this is a case, this is a very peculiar case, uh, which can be understood uh, with the example of horses being described in the modern times not as an animal species but as engine-less automobiles. So see, he says, see, maybe the same thing is happening with primary orality. The next thing, so there is clearly, you know we can very confidently say that as far as this part of the essay is concerned, it interrogates the term oral literature and then it rejects it, that this is inappropriate, this is not the right way to deal with what we can now call oral art, because art has existed almost in every culture. It is not the monopoly of modern times. Art has existed in oral forms, but modern people have a tendency of, of describing this oral art in their own, ways of understanding and looking at it as a substitute for of written art. Oral art was a substitute of written art. This is the basic problem in this essay. This is not the case according. So the next uh, option is pre-literate. He says, although the term pre, I'm quoting, although the term pre-literate itself is useful and at times necessary, if used unreflectively, it also presents problems. So the next term, which can be an alternative to oral literature, is the term pre-literate. But the writer is dissatisfied with this term as well, because he says here also the uh, the term literate leads to a situation where the whole meaning of orality may not be captured. So uh, then the next term, which is taken up for discussion uh, as as an alternative, is text. So text is a viable and an acceptable option according to the writer, because the term text has some connotations which can be easily related with uh, oral art. Let me quote: text, from a root meaning to weave, is in absolute terms more compatible etymologically with oral utterance than is literature. So he is more pleased with the term text when it is used for uh, for describing oral art, because the primary connotation of text is to weave, to create something, and that is precisely how oral art can be uh, understood. Uh, the, I'm quoting, oral discourse has commonly been thought of, even in oral milieus, as weaving or stitching. To rhapsodize basically means in Greek to stitch songs together. So this takes you very close to the origins of song, to the origin of art, in the ability of the artist to creatively weave sounds, weave sounds together to uh, create meaningful texts. Now, so this is a possibly much better way of, but somewhere in the essay he also said that that we have divorced language so much from sound, that when a modern man imagines or visualizes a word, he imagines, or he or she imagines and visualizes the word as a letter. The picture that flashes in your mind is when you, let's say, the word he mentions is nevertheless. Now, when you say nevertheless, you see it as Nevertheless, and not as a combination of sounds. The sounds like n, e, v, and the, so on. So he says we are so much obsessed with writing that we have completely, or to a great extent, divorced language from sound, in which language had its origin. Finally, towards the end, referring to Northrop Frye's Anatomy of Criticism, he proposes another term. The term is epos, and epos means voice. He says we can justifiably, quite legitimately, theorize oral literature as voice, rather than calling it, describing it as oral literature, pre-literate works of art, or other such things. And the only other way of dealing with oral art is through self-explanatory circumlocutions like purely oral art forms, verbal art forms. So this constitutes the subject of this essay.